beautiful technology. I'm Michelle Darland, and I am the president of AFP Quad Cities, and I'm thrilled today to bring you our inaugural kickoff lunch and learn for January 2023, and I'm thrilled to introduce Cherian Koshi. He is currently serving as the vice chair of professional development for the global board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. So we have a global AFP board member in our midst. And he is the past chair of the Iowa Commission on Volunteer Service, Volunteer Iowa. Cherian is an AFP master trainer, certified scale architect, a certified mind genomics advisor, which I think I need to know more about, and holds certifications in behavioral economics from Dan Ariely's Irrational Labs, as well as Harvard University. I present Cherian Koshi to talk to us about acquisition strategies. Welcome, Cherian.
Thank you. Please stand with me for a moment. There's a rough part about speaking in January because everybody started these New Year resolutions. So everyone is hangry and everyone is sore. And so I apologize that I'm going to make you do this, but if you would just cross your arms for a moment. Now, notice kind of where your arms are crossed and do the opposite. Right? Feels weird. Go ahead and sit down. I promise there will be no Macarena or anything else like that today. However, I wanted to get you into the mindset of how our brains work. We are used to doing certain things, and it is very, very difficult for us to do something very different from what we have done before, as you can imagine, with just switching arms. Now imagine doing something that requires more thought, more process in our brains. So we're here to talk about donor acquisition strategies. And in particular, one of the things that I want to focus on, what I want to focus on is the psychology around these acquisition strategies, because a lot of times we get into a process where we try lots of things, but they don't necessarily work, and we don't know why. And the same thing is true with our New Year's resolutions, right? I think studies say that most New Year's resolutions are done by February, which is unfortunate in its own route, right? So we're going to talk about kind of what goes wrong with the things that we do, what stops us from actually obtaining donors. And by the way, you feel free to take notes, but you'll get access to the slides at the end, so don't feel like you need to. There's stuff on here that's unreadable because it's too small, but it's good framework stuff that you can look at when you get the PDF. Then we're really going to talk about what are the things that you can do, and not just where are those donors, but how to reach them effectively, and then ultimately what are the tools that you can use to accomplish that starting this afternoon. That's my goal for you. Unlike other people that might just sort of pontificate, everything in here that's research-based will have a link to it, so you can follow the research. I'm not one of these people who says, this is what I think, and you should just sort of believe me. I want you to follow the primary research around this. So we're going to start with sort of where we struggle, particularly when it comes to donor acquisitions. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. Grab a chair wherever you can. Now, I would be remiss if I started out any sort of acquisition conversation without briefly talking about stewardship and engaging our existing donors. So knowing that this is an acquisition conversation, I'm going to spend the least amount of time on this part, but it is essential that you know that if you don't have good stewardship in place, if you are not keeping the donors that we acquire by the end of this presentation, we're going to be in a lot of trouble on its own, right? So remember that it costs between 5 and 10 times as much to acquire a donor than it does to keep a donor. 5 to 10 times as much. So if you come into an acquisition conversation and you are not willing to spend, whether it's time or money, because our time as fundraisers is actually money, right? We need to get paid to do that. So that investment of time and money is going to happen when we talk about acquisition. So as we think about stewardship, if we don't have that leaky bucket firmed up, not 100% retention, but some version of retention that we're comfortable with, we are not going to have that foundation laid to focus on building those strong relationships. There is absolutely no point, and I would tell you and recommend to you that you do not engage in donors acquisition if you cannot keep those donors, because you will just run out of money. Same thing would be true with the business. So lots of great stewardship advice out there that is pretty straightforward. You all are smart, you know how to do that. I just want to make sure that that's at the forefront of what we're talking about. Our general average around donor retention, national, yours may be way different than this, is 45%. So that means that for every donor that we acquired in 2022, we would expect less than half of them to still be giving in 2023. Now, that can be challenging from the perspective of what are we doing from an acquisition perspective. So first and foremost, retention is the new acquisition. If we can move that retention rate from 45 to 55, you have a significant cash advantage. If you can move it from 45 to 65, that's a huge advantage, right? When I work with particularly small and mid-sized organizations, we go into their file, we can make a year, maybe 2 years worth of budget back on lapsed donors, on bringing back lapsed donors. Obviously, stewardship increases retention, and good stewardship matters, whatever that looks like for your organization. Lots of different types of organizations here. So we're going to stay high level when we talk about acquisition now. So there are a few psychological principles that are unique to what's happening in sort of the post-pandemic world. And there's 3 principles of this that I'm going to focus on. One is the difference between FOMO and JOMO. FOMO, if you know what that means, is the fear of missing out, and versus the joy of missing out. So at one point in our philanthropic journey as an organization, we wanted to create these events where people said, or activities, whatever it might be, where people didn't want to be left out. They wanted to be at that event. Maybe it was gala, maybe it was a golf tournament, maybe it was something else that we did, and they felt being left out of that. But what the pandemic has introduced to us is this concept of the joy of missing out, that we don't have to feel like we are everywhere, we're doing all the things. And this is there are different people that have that kind of different approach. So when it comes to the joy of missing out, there's an accessibility and convenience factor. So maybe it's attending the chapter event online, right? So you don't have to leave your desk, and you don't have to, get your lunch and whatnot. You can just easily do that. You probably experienced some component of that in your life. You don't do certain things anymore that you used to do maybe 2 or 5 years ago. It definitely saves money, right? So whether that's watching Hamilton on TV versus going to Hamilton in person, and there's an entire economy that's built around stay at home. Right? All kinds of things that you can do now at home that you don't do in person. Now, what I want to clarify to you is that you can have both of these things at the same time. There may be people who are interested in going out, but also want to stay in. So it's not just 2 different groups of people, it's any of your potential donors at any given time who are sort of indecisive about what they want to do and how they want to do it. When it comes to that old kind of fear of missing out, we have to amp up that experience in the New World Order in 2023, because we have to get over a bigger hurdle than we have in the past. So from a psychological perspective, what does that mean? It means doing something a little bit more than the kind of bare minimum. So people are not going to be excited about coming to the rubber chicken dinner anymore, really, no matter what. Right? We've got to do something that's a little bit more premium. The example of that, which I normally use, and now that Southwest has sort of had a meltdown, is the kind of that middle tier fare, right? You have the bargain basement fare, and then you have the one where, the like early seating or early boarding is a possibility. That's what I mean when I talk about sort of that premium mediocre. It's still a low cost airline, but it's something that's a little bit more. So when you think about that, what is the little bit more that your donors are expecting in order to engage with your organization? Relatedly, they want a much more personalized experience. right? So it can't be this sort of mass mass engagement process where you're just a number, you're completely anonymized and nobody knows who you are or what you're doing. I can do that from home. So as a donor, particularly a prospective donor, this is not going to be, if it's not personalized, if it doesn't mean something to me, it's not going to be engaging. And some form of exclusivity. You probably are aware of exclusivity as a psychological principle. If there are only if it's a limited time offer, if there's only so many of them that are available, that's a continuing force in the psychology of our prospective donors. So what does that look like? Does it mean maybe saying there are only 100 seats available? A friend, Tammy Zonker, is doing an online workshop later this month, and there are only 1,000 seats available. 1,000 seats, you're like, oh, that seems like a lot, right? But there's only 100 left. So what's the psychological principle behind why Tammy would say there's only 100 seats left? Well, if you're not in there yet and it's free, so of course that's a reason to sign up. But it creates that psychology of exclusivity. We're going to come back to some of these psychological principles moving forward. But you have a lot of people who have been cloistered in their homes or in their workplaces, and they're ready to go, they're ready to party, they're ready to do something. And they're like, so one of the things that I'm seeing, not just in Des Moines and Central Iowa, but all over the country, is prospective donors who are interested in finding out what's out there, what's happening. And so there is sort of this, what did I miss? What's happening? And an interest in getting out and going to activities or events. They have been sitting in front of their home, in front of their TV, and if you can get them out, if you can get them to do something, there is excitement about that, and we're seeing that as a trend nationwide. The second sort of related component is this in real life versus online dilemma. So do I need to be in person here to have this type of relationship, this type of face-to-face interaction, or can I do, no one's online so I can do this, right? Can I do this to the camera and it's okay, right? I don't know how that's gonna look, so it might be really awkward, like you saw up my nose or something. Just fast forward to that. But the idea is, and there are components where in real life really makes a difference, but there are components where online is totally fine, right? And I would say, particularly if there are people here who are not AFP members, being in person actually does make a difference. There's conversation here, there's an opportunity to network, you get to know people in a different way. But if you're sticking a camera on me as a presenter, it doesn't really, like what I'm saying to you, you could get online. And maybe you have, I don't know. But what other people have are available to speak, doing that out in the universe, you could do this from your desk, right? So what is valuable about being an AFP member, what's valuable about being in your seats today is not the information that I'm going to give you. Hopefully it is, there's a little bit of that. What's really going to be helpful is that after this, you are in the hall and you're having a conversation, or we can talk and say, how would this apply to the library? How would this apply to this organization? That's what makes a difference. So one of the things that we think about when it comes to donor acquisition strategies is social media. Now remember that we talked about how we have to spend money to make money, particularly when it comes to donor acquisition. What I want to make clear to you is that by demographic, I don't believe in too much weight on demographics, but demography does play a huge part in how people consume social media, how they interact with social media. I'm going to go through this in detail. What I want you to understand is that if you are targeting boomers, for example, where do they live? Not on Snapchat, right? Are there boomers on Snapchat? Probably. I don't know. I don't have Snapchat. I'm really close to boomer. But like as a Gen Xer, and I don't know if you knew this, but Pinterest was founded by an Iowa native who from Roosevelt High School in Des Moines. But anyway, these people, I am not on Pinterest, even though Ben founded it and Ben's a friend of mine. But I don't really get this. It's not my world. I don't really use social media. But you understand how these people think about the world around them and how they interact with people. And what I don't want to get focused on is the tool. So don't get hung up on, I need to be posting on Facebook. Maybe you do. How do these people think about relationships? How do these people think about interacting with other people? Do boomers want to be primarily focused online? No, they do not. They do not. In general, they do not. Does that mean every boomer wants to be in person? Of course not. But as a trend, as a concept, how do they relate to other people? How do they share information? How do they think about, the why of what they do? And how can we craft content now that aligns with how these people consume information? So, for example, if you were, and I hope that you think of acquisition around this area and not that area as a primary spend, I guess that depends on your organization. But in general, these people have more disposable income, right? They have more charitable inclinations than those folks do. And I'll prove that at the end. But what are they looking for? Photos and articles. They're interested in learning things. So can we share content on social media or on email or in some other way that aligns with the things that they care about, potentially? So the last thing that I want to talk about, I think this is the last thing, is the we versus me psychological approach. So we're all sort of biased in one way or another, but potentially kind of anchored in one area around individualism versus collectivism. One of the things that we saw during the pandemic was this sort of inward reversion in some ways around self-improvement. How many people decided to bake bread or learn a new hobby or whatever, all of those jokes, right? And so the idea around individualism is, how can I improve myself? How can I learn a new skill? How can I become a better person? What do those things look like for me? And it is that entire inward focus versus something like collectivism, which is, how do we engage lots of people in a big way? And one of those is the concept of virality. We live in a world now that is quite a bit smaller than it once was, meaning I can share something and somebody else halfway across the world who would never, ever have heard of me or what I produced 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, now has instantaneous access to that, and it can go from place to place very, very quickly. So we have this sort of what I call value migration, where something created in another part of the world can influence us significantly. Want proof of that? How many people know who this band is? Right? And if you don't know who they are, I promise you, you've heard their music. Why? Because in 24 hours, a Korean band got 74 million views, and now a statistically significant, way statistically significant, right? 20% of the world has seen this video on YouTube. That's not actually true, but like 1.6 billion views is a whole lot of people. For a Korean band, K-pop band, right? BTS is super popular, but how much has that been translated into popularity around K-pop generally? So there is this idea of values migration that is not just US centered. It's not US values moving out to other countries. It's other elements of now Korean culture, for example, right? Korean beauty, Korean music, all these other Korean food, that's all influencing even things that are happening in places that you would never think of before, right? And your access to that. So what does that look like then, specifically for donors? This is the most recent FEP data, and you can link to it here as well. In general, about 40% of our donor file, the FEP donor file, is new donors. In general, that's the case, okay? And 36% of our file is repeat retained donors, meaning they've given multiple times and they continue to give. So when we're thinking about how do we get new donors? How do we get this group to be larger? One of the things that we need to be aware of is, how do these folks retain, right? So new donors in particular are the least likely to give again, versus that repeat donor retention rate. Meaning we have to be really focused on, what does that first donor experience look like? How do we talk to someone the first time? How do we engage with them the first time? So can we find them? That's actually not the problem. Finding them is not the problem. Keeping them is the problem. Make sense? So what's stopping us from both finding and keeping? Because I want to address that. I want to make sure that you have something to take away immediately. So what is the best way to find new donors? I'm sure every single one of you has a different idea of what that looks like, and that is totally, totally fine. If you have not seen this chart, and I apologize for the granularity of it, but anybody know what this is? Yeah, Hank Rosso's concentric circles idea. It's in every textbook, including the Greenfield textbook. If you're taking your CFRE, this is like core to what you do. The point here is that there are people in the center, and then there's whatever that looks like for your organization. So here it's major donors, board, and management. Those are in the center, and then you have general donors, employees, volunteers, clients, members, whatever that means for your organization, and then it moves out. This is a very old concept, but here's what I want. If this is new to you, what I want you to understand is you see those things at the top, people with similar interests in the organization's universe. That's where most organizations look for their donors, and that's why most organizations fail to acquire new donors, okay? Because, anybody watch Shark Tank on ABC? My kids love Shark Tank. I don't know why, but we watch Shark Tank every once in a while, and you know, if my kids were older, they're under 10, but if we were to create a drinking game, we would have a drink, and when they're older, we'll have a drinking game around it. But every episode, there's someone who says, this market is $1 billion market, right? If we just get into this market, there's $1 billion here. Every single episode this happens. And so many nonprofits I talk to are like, there are so many people out there. There are so many rich people in our community. Really? That I was once working in an organization where we had gotten a gift from Oprah, which is the worst thing to have. Worst thing to have, not because of Oprah and her generosity, but because every board member from then on would say with credibility, why don't we just call Oprah? Like, and then we got a gift from Mark Cuban, and I was like, stop, done. I don't want to hear this again, right? Because those people have people to stop me from asking them for money. That's the whole job is to do that. That's nuts, right? So if this is new to you, remember that your target market is not the entire universe. It starts from the center and moves out. Whatever that looks like for your organization, it starts from the center and moves out. And when we get to the next chapter, we'll talk about what those strategies look like. The other way to think about donor acquisition is that copycat kind of approach, right? So who are your donors? What do they look like? And where do they surround themselves? And what are the things that they do so that we can identify donors that follow that same pattern, right? We have donors who have walked the path potentially, and so we want to find folks who are also on that path. Let's say, for example, you're an animal rescue league, for example, an animal shelter. So who are your potential donors? It's not anyone in the Quad Cities. It's not anyone that might walk by, right? It's not even anyone that might come to your events. So who are the people that look like your donors? And you can get very precise about this. So if you have not created an ideal donor profile, a donor persona, that would be your first step. So when I worked at Des Moines Performing Arts, we knew exactly what our ideal donor profile looked like. We put names to this. So she was a 45-year-old woman who worked in marketing. She's like middle management, enjoyed taking her kids and her family to the Civic Center for performances. And there was a whole bio on this fake person. And so every time we wrote copy, we would be writing to this person named Mary. And there are lots of tools that you can use, very basic tools. You can use, ChatGPT to create a donor profile for you. You can actually analyze who's coming to your website or who is in your existing donor file to create that donor persona. You can append information about your donors with credit card marketing data, experience marketing data to say you overperform in these certain types of demographics. And because of that, this is where you should focus your attention. You can take that information, that donor persona information, it's a 45-year-old woman who works in middle management, blah, 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 and then apply that to the general public in your local area and identify who fits that profile. Sean at Boodle AI has a way to do that with targeting through like Google searches and advertisements that he does through his platform. So there's lots of ways of leveraging this at both a kind of general level where you don't need any kind of sophisticated analysis or work. You just need to know who to talk to and how to talk to them. But then also at a very high technical level, here are some tools and things that you can add to the work that you're doing to make it really sophisticated and create that very specific outreach, okay? So lots of people do copycat analysis. I want to warn you, however, that there is one very, and maybe tell me if you know what it is. What is the problem with this copycat way of acquiring new donors?
You might be leaving other people out on the table. You might be leaving money on the table because they don't fit that persona.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So we're at the Civic Center. Civic Center's been around 40 years. Consultant came in and said, let's do this copycat kind of analysis, right? And so what did they do? They did a recency, frequency, monetary value of our database. They said, here are all of your donors, here's what they've given, here's what how often they give, here are their demographic information, all of that. Anybody kind of guess what that would relate to then for future donors? They would all be 45-year-old white women. That's what the analysis showed. All of your future donors should be 45-year-old white women. In Des Moines, that is no longer still the entire demographic of who we would want to reach out to. So I want to very specifically caution you, you should use some parts of this. You should understand if your donors are for this animal shelter, for example, attend, go to the dog park and they visit these stores and they do things together in certain ways, right? These are very communal people. People with animals hang out with other people that like animals, right? You're not normally friends with someone who hates dogs if you really love dogs, right? And that's true of every single one of your cause areas. If you are a homeless shelter, for example, and your donors really care about that issue, their friend circle are not people that do not like homeless shelters, don't think they should be anywhere near civilization, right? I was talking to one yesterday and we were going through how to deal with the kind of not in my backyard approach of shelters for people who are suffering from homelessness. And so those donors that love what you do are not people who hang out often with people who hate that cause area. And you can think of that in every single way, right? So while lots of money in this country goes to things like religion and higher ed and people and health and human services in particular, right? Like people who, a lot of organizations feel like, oh, if we're not the food bank, no one's going to give us money, especially when we're talking about like environmental causes and the arts and whatnot. The reality is those are not your donors. You can't go find those people and convince them that they should care about environmental issues if they're not people who are naturally recycling, if they're not people who care about the environmental issues. However, and this is important, so if you are taking notes, write this down. There are people in 2023, in the midst of a recession, who care so much about the cause that you represent that they will sacrifice other things to give you money. They will sacrifice other things to continue to make donations to your organizations. That's how much they care about what you do. So you need to hold on to that and then find those people. That is your strategy. These are the people, and we find that actually in animal causes in particular. There are studies that were done last year in 2022. If you want it and you work at an animal shelter, let me know and I'll send it to you. studies that were done that people will forego their own meals before they would stop feeding their animals. That is amazing, right? So do those people care about the welfare of animals so much that they would make a gift to the animal shelter? Absolutely, right? They'll prioritize their own animal family member, right, before the other one. But where does this rank on their value system? Super, super high. And they will make sacrifices to give to the causes that they care about. So this is just a visual representation of where that donor life cycle looks like. And I want you to remember that if you are looking at conversion rates, so again, you'll get access to this later. If you have 1,000 prospects, our expectation is that somewhere around 2% of them will translate into actual donors, right? So it's a very, very small number. This is important, and you can, when you get the slides, feel free to, take my CK logo off of it and use it for board members or for whatever internal use. But the point here is people are going to tell you, well, we should just post on social media, we will get new donors. And the important thing to recognize is that 1,000 people that see the post and might engage with it might possibly lead to 20 donors. It is not 200. It is not 500. It is not a huge number. So we need to be very careful about the resources that we spend and how we use those resources in order to engage those individuals. So as you see that process, you've got 20 new donors, 9 of them renew, 11 of them don't. 9 of them stay, and then you have these folks that lapse out, and then you might be able to recapture one of them and potentially upgrade another one. So of that effort, you've got to be clear on what are the financial ramifications of doing these activities and how do we pick the right 1,000 people, okay? And that's what we're gonna spend, and this is the one that I told you is really too small. But you'll get this later, and the point that we're gonna focus on, these are my 8 I's of donor engagement, and we're gonna be focusing on identify and initiate. So when we're thinking about how do we identify and initiate that arrangement with those prospective donors, the key is we're finding out people who already care about the cause area. They are already they not only just care about it, they care about it a lot. So as an organization, again, there's 14 different types of organizations here in the room. I can't do that for each one of you in this moment, but what does it look like to not just be aware of what it is that you do, but engaged in what you do in some way, some way that's demonstrable out in the world? Sometimes, like some other arts organization be like, oh, they're in your playbill, and that public document indicates that they have some interest, but you don't really know why someone gave to that thing, right? So you don't know if they really care about programming for kids and making it accessible for kids, or they just felt like being a good community member and it looks good for them to be on this list or whatever. So that doesn't tell you enough. It tells you something, but it doesn't tell you enough about kind of why they're engaged with the organization. And then how does that donor initiate engagement with your with what you're doing? It's all about creating an engagement continuum. So there's lots of different ways that people can get information about who you are and what you do. One of the things that we need to remember is that people consume all of these, not one of these. Does that mean you should be engaging in all of these channels? Maybe. I don't want to be a should head and say you should be doing all of these things at all times. But there are people who will just, board members like, emails are free. Let's just send lots of emails. Social media is free. Let's just send social media, right? Post on social media would be fine, right? No, obviously not, right? Organic reach on social media is really low. Some of these other pieces are limited. So one of the things to think about is how do we develop an omni-channel approach to those targeted individuals that we're focused on. So we want to craft a story around that 1,000 people that we're going to, maybe it's 100, it doesn't matter. Those individuals, what are the ways in which they engage with stuff? Does it make sense to meet with them face to face? Does it make sense to send multiple emails, not maybe 3 emails a day, but does it make sense to engage with them regularly with communication? And what channels do we use to do that? So again, when you get the PDF, you can think about during these phases, so this is the one that, oops, sorry. There we go. This is the blank one that you can just copy. It's not, but maybe there are other channels that you might use, but you want to focus on what are the ways in which we would engage that ideal potential donor profile, that particular persona that we've created who's engaged. Now, how do we talk to them in person? How do we talk to them over email? Do we have a phone strategy? Do we have a video or a mail strategy? What does that look like to identify who those folks are, make sure that they are actually going to, be worth the time that we're going to put in to initiate that conversation around potential giving. So one way of thinking about that is in person with cultivation events, right? So maybe you've done a fundraiser, maybe you haven't. A lot of times we think about that as fill the room, how many people can we get in there? But the reality is that you want to be very cautious, curate that experience intentionally so that there are people. So if Sally is going to come to that event, why is Sally coming to that event? Ideally, it's because someone that Sally knows and trusts invited her to that event and is going to engage with her throughout that event. So that Sally doesn't feel like she's just a name in the space and we don't know, and at some point we're going to ask her for money, right? We want to make sure that that is a curated, remember, personalized experience. She finds value in coming to the event and she is engaged in a meaningful way with the people, not just the cause. So of course, if she loves animals, she's sold already. We don't have to worry too much about that piece. But there are lots of animal-related organizations out there. So we need to make sure that she understands these are the people that I want to hang out with, these are the people that I want to engage with. If there's some sort of agenda at your event, and I know a lot of people do events, so wanted to touch on that point. But if there is some sort of agenda with that event, is that about you and what you do, or is that about this group of people? So again, back to the example at the Performing Arts Center, we would create events of people who would come solely. We would have a reason for why they were coming to the event. They would be invited by a donor, and they're a prospective donor. We'd invite them to the Civic Center to experience a kids show over lunch. So we would have lunch for them. They would come, most of them were older, so they weren't leaving work or whatever. So they're coming to this event, and there was no real agenda except for them to come and see kids experiencing live theater for the first time. And one of the things that I said to them when they came into that cultivation event, we didn't call it that obviously, but when they came into that event is, all I want you to do is when those lights go down, pick a kid and watch their face. Just watch their face. And inevitably, you see kids' faces light up, and that's the moment, that's the glow that I wanted to have with those people, right? And so what does this do? Does it lend itself then to like insisting or engaging them, like asking them for money? No, it opens the door for me to have a conversation with them. It opens the door for me to say, tell me about that time, that experience that you had. What did you see? And what are they doing? They're reliving that experience, that memory of this kid whose face lit up, right? Those engage that donor in a meaningful way. Our major gift officer, when she was talking to donors who had never given before, the question that she asked was not about philanthropy generally. It was not about, your favorite Broadway show. It was, who took you to your first performance? Why? Because memory, nostalgia, creates that meaningful connection. So obviously they have to care about animals, arts, the environment, whatever it is. But once they do, we need to fuse their existing cause relationship, their identity with the thing that we're doing. That fusion, here's the secret, and someday this will be my book. This is the reason why donor retention is where it is. Because if you haven't been in Sunday school for a minute, it's the parable of the sower, but it's the parable of the donor, right? Where we cast out these messages and some of them sit. Some of them, you know, somebody asked you to come to an event, somebody asked you to donate, go on the walk, the ride, whatever. And you're like, hey, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'll show up on Christmas and Easter and it'll be fun, right? But then life happens and life gets in the way of what was our good intention, right? So the people, when we're taught, if you take one thing away from this, it is, if you're gonna spend time and money on donor acquisition, find the people with the deep roots. Find the people with the deep roots and pour into that. Pour into those people. Now, if you go back, I'm not going to jump back to that slide, but if you go back to Hank's concentric circles, those are the people in the middle, right? The major donors, the board members, those are the people who are true believers and who are most likely to be evangelists. So coming back to this analogy, can we find a way to leverage those relationships and those opportunities to help us with donor acquisition? I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by this, however. It can easily seem like there's a lot of work on your part to do this effort and get new donors, and that can be overwhelming, especially in light of maybe there's a recession, maybe blah, 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 right? Whew, right? That can be overwhelming. I don't want you to feel that way. What I do want you to think about is, how are there different tools that have emerged over the decades that can help you accelerate this work, make it easier for you to engage with your donors in meaningful ways so that you don't have to worry about doing this all by yourself. You can get help. Many of these are available free or on, at a low cost and whatnot. But what are the ways that you can think about, some of those challenges? So one is, how can we get lots of eyeballs? And these are things that like a board member or some thought leader, whatever, will say that are actually really stupid. So these are, don't take notes on this. These are things to, right? How can we get lots of eyeballs on a thing? I've had CEOs who are like, this wasn't a worthwhile event if 500 people don't show up. Wrong? No, you don't know what you're talking. If I got 5 people in that room, right? And there are all 5 people who have those deep roots so I can connect with and move forward in a meaningful way, that was absolutely worth it. And the data, right? If you're looking at the lifetime value of a donor, if your lifetime value is $200, which is actually pretty low for lifetime value, and you say, I got 5 people who are deeply invested in this mission, all of which at a $200 lifetime value, that was $1,000 activity. And I spent an hour doing it, totally worth it, right? I don't need eyeballs. I don't need a viral video. I don't need that kind of approach. Same thing is true with this idea of surprise and delight. Is there room for surprise and delight to do something special for your donors? Absolutely. But the random acts of fundraising have got to stop. We can't just throw things at people and be like, here's a bookmark, here's the thing, right? Like, why? Why did that connect them deeper with the cause? Of course, everyone's just, and I see this online a lot, and I manage a Facebook group that has 20,000 nonprofits on it. And there are so many comments from fundraisers just like us, where they're saying, our board members just tell us we have to justify our position, or our ED tells us we have to justify our position by raising X number of dollars or whatever. And it's just, churn, right? Work harder, call more people. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. It is not an input to output. That doesn't work in sales, and it doesn't work in philanthropy either. So it's important to recognize, if you're going to figure this out really fast, but someone posted like, how do we justify how do we create metrics for our grant position and justify this position to our leadership? One person works on grant writing. What is the expected monetary value of that? And I'm like, what? Tractors don't make apples? What are you talking about? If your organization sucks, then all the grant writers in the world are not going to be able to get you grants. So this is a bad calculation. Absolutely. It's important to recognize what goes into these pieces around. It's not just working harder, it's working smarter. And then the part that frustrates me the most, and Michelle mentioned this before, is around marketing materials. So often we hem and haw over what are the talking points, right? What is our elevator pitch? How can we fix this one-sheeter? How many times have we been asked to produce these things that just feel like stuff that nobody actually uses? In reality, I love marketing materials. I love all the things. And if you're a marketing person, I'm not trying to on your job or your effort. But here's the thing. There is no, this is going to be a hard pill to swallow, and I'm sorry. There is no perfect turn of phrase. There isn't. There are a handful of billion-dollar brands who have come up with a turn of phrase that you will remember. Just do it, right? That is not your organization, I promise you, right? Can anybody tell me what the turn of phrase is for the American Red Cross? Just believe. Red Cross is doing fine, right? They're okay.
You save lives?
I don't know. I haven't called them tomorrow. I'll ask. I don't know. Right? What about American Cancer? Right?
Another birthday celebration?
There was a birthday celebration campaign. Charity Water. Everybody loves Charity Water. What is the marketing? What is the brand that pitch for Charity Water? Silence. Deafening silence. All of this stuff, right, is not, it's not going to make the difference in acquiring that donor. And if Charity Water started with that, where would they be? We got to figure out what is our elevator pitch? What is our like pithy little saying that we're going to use? What is our just do it moment? They would be in the crapper, right? They would not be where they are today. And you can imagine all of these other nonprofits that would be in the same position, just like, and if you hem and haw over getting the exact right word or the exact right image or the exact right design or the exact right logo, you will stop doing the things that you should be doing in order to do the things that will not make a difference. And if I can impart that one thing to you, I will have achieved everything that I would ever want to do. Don't waste your time doing the things that don't work. Do the things that matter. And if that is actually having face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball conversations with 5 people, do that. Do that instead of trying to spray and pray with 200, with people that don't make a difference and won't care about your organization 15 minutes from now. It is a waste of your time and resources. And a lot of times we see that in these random best practices. I love Tamsin Webster. I did not personally, but her content is amazing. And if you ever get a chance to get her to hear her speak, I would highly encourage it. Check out her YouTube video. What do we need from a message? What do we need from something that comes across to our donors? And it is the idea that it reinforces that they are capable, they're smart, capable, and good. And if they believe that thing, they will listen to anything that you tell them. If you can tell them that they are smart, capable, and good, they will listen to your recommendations. Now, if you are super smart, you will recognize that for the last 45 minutes, I have done that to you. I have continued to tell you that you know what you're doing. And I'm not lying to you. I know that you know what you're doing and that you are capable of doing this. And the work that you are doing is good. So I hope that you listen to these recommendations, not because I'm trying to snowball you, but because there's an important component of accelerating your work. I mentioned the idea of memory and nostalgia before as a psychological principle. I can tell you exactly where I was and what I was doing the first time I saw Karate Kid. So when Cobra Kai came out, absolutely. My kids are too young to watch it. Too many swear words. $1 billion movie, right? Look at the highest grossing movies of this year. Just think about them in your head. Do they almost all tap into some kind of a nostalgia, some type of sequel, right? Why? Because memory has such an important component of what it is that we're inclined to do. And unfortunately, a lot of our messaging, especially when we're thinking about acquiring new donors, is what's called system 2 thinking, system 2 advertising. I never use a nonprofit in these examples because I don't want to offend anyone that does this and does it obviously poorly. So I use Listerine ads, right? Anybody convinced to use Listerine based upon this ad that says, you know, it's got these fluoride thingies and these are the active ingredients, and dentist, blah, blah, blah. How often do we go to prospective donors and say, here are all the facts, just the facts, ma'am, right? Oh, that was really old reference, right? Equally effective every single day. This is our compelling copy, right? And we go to prospective donors trying to prove to them, you should be giving. This is a good cause and you should give to this good cause. Well, what happens when the next gal or the next guy has a better persuasive case for doing that, for giving to their other organization? What do we do then? How do we amp up our persuasive appeal? I used to coach debate. I can tell you that there's a limit to where you can get in terms of persuasion. My kids were real good. So what's more effective in acquisition? System 1 ad. Our system 1 thinking are the automatic kind of intuitional drives to do something. And you see this picture, and then you see this tagline. What will go through your mouth today? Now, I'm going to tell you, because even though I'm not an academic, doing psychological tricks on people is really kind of a tricky area. I am going to engage in inception right now, okay? You will never, ever forget this picture. Years from now, you will come up to me at the AFP Icon Conference or somewhere else where you see me, and you will say, I remember that picture. And here's why. I want you to close your eyes and think of your office. Think of your desk. See the phone. See the papers, the books, whatever that's strewn on your desk. Now, place that glass on the desk with all the fruits and ice cream and candy in the glass with the pen sticking out on top. You see it there? Okay, open your eyes. Every time you walk into your office, not every single time, but you will walk into your office today, you will look at your desk and you will see that. 6 weeks later, something will happen in your brain. Maybe it's that weird feeling, like something in your teeth, or that filmy feeling. You'll be like, huh, and you will see where that sits on your desk. This image will show up in your brain. In 10 seconds, I implanted a memory that will exist in your brain for years. For years. That's how easy it was. Now, is that universally true? Are you all going to remember it all the time? Like on your deathbed, you're like, oh my gosh, that guy talked about that milkshake class. No, of course not. But, oops, you're gonna remember it more than that? Absolutely. So I don't know what that image looks like for your organization, what that compelling message looks like for your organization, but this is what we need to do in order to grab someone's attention enough, not that they're making an immediate decision to give, that they are forming an essential memory of who you are and what you do. That can be as simple as colors. It can be as simple as a graphic, right? Is it just in Des Moines, or is it all throughout the state where there are lots of Shriners commercials right now? Are you seeing this on TV? Shriners commercials? It's like every ad for me. Does anybody, if you've seen this ad, these kids talking about how important it is to give the Shriners $19 a day, $19 a month or whatever, there's a giveaway. Does anybody know what the giveaway is? The premium? Yeah.
It's a blanket.
It's a blanket. What's the image on the blanket?
Bear.
It's a bear. And there's one kid in this 30-second commercial that lifts it up. But watch the commercial from now on. That blanket, that image is all throughout that. And you remember this red blanket with this little bear on it. I don't need a blanket. I certainly don't need a blanket with a bear, but I remember this commercial and I have no idea why, because psychologists, neuroscientists, we can't figure out what memory is. We have no clue what memory is, how it's formed, how it's retained. Lots of studies on it, but these things stick in our brains and immediately. None of you could figure out the phrase for Charity Water or Red Cross. You could remember the bear in a Shriners commercial that you saw weeks ago, right? Why? What is that memorable moment? This is what's going to make a difference. So in my, the last few minutes I have, I want to talk to you about how to leverage this for the purposes of getting more donors. We're going to come back now to Hank's concentric circle idea and talk about what does this look like for your particular purpose, your organization, without making you do more work. Because you can get other people to do this for you. You can engage, you can get help and tools. So what does it look like to get these? This is what we're really looking for. $5, $50, $500, even $5,000 is not as valuable as these concepts. For a donor to feel belonging, for them to feel trust, for them to feel purpose through your organization is the deep root donor. That's the donor who says, I will sacrifice, even in a recession, to make a gift to this organization. I will figure out a way. I am going to creatively alter my family's personal budget to make sure that we are still giving to your organization. So what drives these concepts? Now I want you to guess. 92% believe that this concept is more effective than advertising. 83% trust this thing to make purchasing decisions. 74% identify this as a key influencer in purchasing decisions. And some estimates say that 50% of all purchases are made by this. What is it? Research? That's an idea?
Feeling and emotion.
And a feeling and emotion, maybe? Yeah. What else?
Habit.
Habit? Well, yeah, habit. That could be a thing.
Friends and family.
Pardon?
Their friends and family.
What do you mean by that?
We know that so many folks trust their peers, their friends, their family for making those decisions over something like marketing.
If I had a gold star, it would be yours.
Oh.
Okay, so here's the big takeaway. Most businesses know that a strong word of mouth strategy is critical to their growth. Most businesses do not have a word of mouth strategy. I would think that every nonprofit should know that a strong word of mouth strategy is the best way for you to grow your donor base, for you to acquire new donors. I know of a handful of nonprofits that have a word of mouth strategy. It lays the foundation for your acquisition success. It is, and I appreciate the friends and family kind of specificity. How many people have heard of Yelp? How many people look at Amazon reviews? Right? You will trust a complete stranger. Someone you have never and will never meet, but they put 5 stars on the thing. I know that must be the scrubber that I need to use in my bathroom. Really? That's how our brain works. Somebody else that we don't even know said, that's a good idea, you should go do that. And we're like, oh, all right, here's my credit card. Sign me up. All right, sounds good. Now, I don't have time. This is like 45 minutes. Jay Baer is the expert at this concept. And so his whole video, his full keynote is in this document. Go home and watch it. Go back to your office and watch it. And then craft what that looks like for your organization. What does that talk trigger look like? When an individual interacts with your organization, what does that look like? Jay gives the example of the DoubleTree Hotel, the DoubleTree by Hilton. What do you know about the DoubleTree?
Chocolate.
Cookies. In a second, nobody knows about charity water, nobody knows about the Red Cross, you know cookies. Cookies, in a second. And every time that we go into a group of people, we talk about the talk triggers of particular businesses or even particular organizations. There are immediate talk triggers that come to mind. Now, is there a script that your donor, that your board member needs to have about this thing? Sure, like you want to have talking points, but cookies got you there, right? There's an idea that we have to land with our board members, with our donors, to get them to have that conversation, to engage with other people in their networks, to get them excited about it. The reason why board members don't give you names, the reason why board members don't go talking about your organization is because they don't have the talk trigger yet. I will tell you that I will never buy tires from any other place besides Discount Tire. Because one day, my wife had a flat tire. She was dropping a kid off at daycare, and she stopped there because it was right by the daycare. They fixed the flat tire for free. They helped check the other tires. There was no cost. And what did she do? She immediately called me and said, I just have this is what happened, right? And they're taking care of it, and it's great, blah, blah, blah. You have that same experience, that positive experience with some type of business, some type of organization that is that talk trigger that you don't need to have a literal script, dialed in, this is the word to say, this is the phrase that we use, this is the brand voice, blah, blah, blah. You have an idea and you can talk about it. You certainly have one about companies that you will never work with again, right? I will never work with MediaCom, I will never, whatever it is, right? So these talk triggers are powerful, and they allow your donors and your board members and your staff, your team, to organically and authentically talk about what your organization is doing, how it's making a difference, in a way that is just a natural part of who they are. These are the deep root people, right? They can't help but talk about what you do. They can't help talk about how the organization is making a difference. It doesn't need to be organization centered. It doesn't need to be like, we serve 14 people, 400 people, whatever it is, right? It can be more authentic than that. But this is the best way for you to grow your donor base. It is the least talked about way. It is the one that people don't strategize. It doesn't show up on a strategic plan. It doesn't show up in a marketing meeting. This is the thing that will make a difference. And every piece of evidence proves this. Everything in business proves that this makes a difference. And Jay shares all the statistics. I'm not going to steal his stuff, but you get the idea. So how does this play out in a donor world? We often tell donor stories. Someone gave, blah, blah, blah. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not suggesting that you don't do a donor story. You should. There are good reasons to do that, good psychological reasons around social proof. However, how are we helping the donor? How can we frame a donor ask as actually helping a donor through a problem? Maybe it's an intrinsic problem. I wanted to give back. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something, and this organization helped me solve that problem. And I'm so grateful that that problem is solved for me. Maybe it's an extrinsic problem, like a tax thing, right? We talk a lot about that. They were actually able to help their employees. They were actually able to help their family members by giving a gift to an organization that they cared about. So think about, how can we solve a donor problem in our organization? How does that solve the flat tire example, right? Not literally, but maybe your organization does that. Okay. The thing that I want to come back to is the idea of, who are you talking to? Who are you trying to acquire? If I'm at the Iowa State Fair, which I am 7, 8, 9 times a season, very serious. I'm also a donor, and this is my talk trigger, right? This is me as a donor talking about what I do. So this is a busy day at the State Fair, and there are lots of people. If I take my kids, they usually go 2 or 3 times. If I lose my daughter at the Iowa State Fair, I'm not walking around saying, hey, anybody seen a kid? Doesn't matter, like any kid will do. We're just looking for whatever, a kid, right? Just a kid. I'll take any kid, right? No. I don't wander around looking for red. That would be really creepy, right? Really bad. So what do? I grab my phone and I hold up a picture of my daughter and I say, I need to find this kid. I need to find this specific kid. And she's got the chicken and waffle thing, and I know, that's the last time I saw her. Can anybody around that area help me find that kid, that specific kid? Now, sometimes she is a pain, and I would swap her for other kids. However, that's probably something my wife would be upset about. So think about this when it comes to how you are acquiring donors. There's a great book called Exactly What to Say by Phil M. Jones. I recommend it all the time. And this concept that he talks about, like losing his kid in a mall, but mine most likely would get lost in the Iowa State Fair. The idea that he talks about is if you're going to have a dinner party at your house, you don't just open up the front door of your house and say, hey, anybody want to come to dinner? You curate who you want at that dinner party. You pick the people. You say, I want this person and I want that person, and then you bring them together. Phil's book is outstanding, has a lot of other tips for how you have those conversations with donors and ultimately like closing conversations around gifts that I would highly recommend. But as you think about going from this place and what does it look like for you to acquire new donors, I want you to have that in your mind. This is the picture of that donor and hold that up and say, who can help me find that person? Who are the people in our community that can help me identify that specific person? Now, once we get a gift, we come back to that center of the circle. Once we get the gift, often we say, can you make another gift? Can you make a larger gift? I was at a workshop with Lisa Greer, and she's like, I did not have money, and then I had lots of money. And she's like, I didn't know that annual gifts were a thing. So I gave this really big, I gave $50,000. And then they called me up and said, hey, we give $50,000 again. She's like, I didn't know those were the rules. And then they said, well, you give 100. And she's like, wait, what? I just gave you 50, right? So there are people, I think she's in a class of her own in a lot of ways, but I think there are lots of people who don't know that that's the thing that you're supposed to do. But everything that's been taught to us is you ask for another gift, you ask for a larger gift, right? What if, especially with new donors, we said, do you know someone exactly like you, who could benefit from the work that we're doing, benefit from learning about the work that we're doing, benefit from coming to this event, whatever it is, whatever that piece of engagement is. Do you know just one person, not 5, not give me a list, do you know one person? And the answer to that is in their head. It's already in their head. Do you know one person just like you? Why? Because we associate with people like us. Do you know one person that needs a tire change, that might need tires? Yes, that's me, right? But like, is there someone else, right? And will you probably talk about discount tire with them? Probably. Who knows? Will you talk about Listerine? Undoubtedly, right? So when it comes to your toolbox of having those conversations, think about what can you do that is responsive to your donors' needs, that is intentional about your donors' needs, that's useful to them, that has this like positive, exuberant attitude, that is empathetic to where they are. So, you know, especially in recession, if people can't give the same gift, what does that look like? And reaffirms their generosity, right? Reaffirms who they want to be. So when it comes to responsiveness, there's, you know, the counterexample. Amanda Carpenter says, guys, I'm trapped in an Amtrak elevator at BWI, can you help?
Oh my God.
Don't be Amtrak. What my coach says is that if you are terrible, like if you're a terrible person, if you are boring in real life, you are also going to be boring and unexciting on social media and on video. But there are things that you could do. You could not just don't. These tweets are not monitored, right? Like there are ways that you can do this, right? So make sure that you're not making the obvious mistakes that would create the negative talk track. And that will solve some of your problem as well. So we talked about kind of how do we get our donors to tell the story for us? If that's our mindset versus donors are the passive participants. They give us money and then we're done with them. We don't do anything with them. We thank them, do all the things that we're supposed to do. We check those boxes, but what are the things that make the engagement with our organization remarkable, repeatable, reasonable, and relevant? So I'm going to briefly mention this blue ocean strategy idea, which is you all live and play in the same pool, right? Everybody's within 20, 30 miles of each other worst, right? So here's the thing to note from YouGov, this is 2020. 64% of Americans say that they have ever given to charity. Now, I could go for 4 hours on why I think surveys like this are over exaggerated, like people, so I would guess the number is lower than that. 50-some% say that they gave in the last year in 2020. So you do not have to compete against one another. We can all live in the same pool and know that there are lots of people out there who have never given to an organization, but do care about these issues. It's not like there are people who are jerks, right? In every community who don't like anything and you know those people. But there are lots of people who care about things but have never given time or money to an organization. And here is the example of that. I had to go to Starbucks after driving from Des Moines to get a new picture of the new screenshot of this. This is an hour old. I bet you it's even higher. Last night, it was $30,000 less. $30,000 less. He had a goal of $2,500. No one, maybe it was close. I don't remember now. But Sophia and Samantha Bennell, they gave within the last few hours because I did it, and it's $8.8 million. Why? Because these are people who did not know, probably didn't know what the bills were, certainly did not know who this player was, but immediately had an emotional response to something and wanted to do something. They felt helpless and they wanted to do something. And I'm not suggesting you try and develop some viral marketing, something, whatever, or anything related to this health issue. But what does this teach us? People are worried about their money that nobody's going to give. $8.8 million. Are people going to give? They are. They are going to give, and they are going to give generously. ADCO Electrical Company gave $33,000, right? So give donors a story and a reason to share it. Don't reinforce doing work for work's sake. Don't reinforce doing work for work's sake. I'm not going to play this video, but you've seen it. It's the end of the Avengers Endgame movie. And at the end of the movie, just to summarize for you, it's like 2 or 3 minutes long. At the end of the movie, they think that they're defeated, right? There's a handful of them that are battling this villain. They think that they're defeated. And what ends up happening is everybody else shows up. Everybody and their grandmother's a great, powerful number. That's what you have the capacity to do. It doesn't have to rest on your shoulder. You do not have to be burdened by this on your own. You can leverage these tools and these ideas to get everyone in your organization on board with donor acquisition and do this work on your behalf so that you have an army of people who can help you and make this more powerful, more scalable, more engaging than ever before. So don't forget that you are not alone. This is not a job that was ever designed for you to do by yourself. It was a job for you to facilitate doing with other people. That's the exciting part about fundraising. There's a link to the slides, which is just my website and the slides. You could connect with me on social media, but I wanted to create, I know that you have jobs to do and you need to get back to it. If you have questions that we can answer here as a group, I would love to do that. If you want to, if you have a question that's more suited to a separate conversation, feel free to reach out over social media, we can talk. But before we get into Q&A, I just want to take a moment because I know some of you have to scatter and that's totally fine. Thank you for the work that you do. Every single day, you walk into your office, into your organizations, and you make a difference in this community. I want you to hold your heads up high throughout this year, no matter what comes, because there are people that are depending on you, not just the clients of your organization, the beneficiaries, but there are donors for whom these are their deep roots. These are the things that wake them up in the morning and give them life, and you do that for them. So please remember that you are valued, you make a difference every single day. Thank you for being here, for investing in professional development to scale your efforts, but thank you for the work that you're doing.
So, if you can stay or have a question, please, you have a little bit of time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I just got to drive back home, so I'm good. The longer I can be standing, the better.
I think I need to know why there was a bottle cap in the ice cream.
Because I think people chew on the bottle caps. I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, that I totally could relate to putting that.
I